You're listening to Everybody Pulls the Tarp, the go-to podcast for high performers. I'm Andrew Moses. Each week, you'll hear my thought-provoking conversations with Olympians, pro athletes, CEOs, elite coaches, best-selling authors, and other high performers to uncover their secrets to success. Get ready to be inspired each week when we talk about leadership, teamwork, work ethic, and more. Are you ready? Let's go. This week, my guest is journalist and author Polina Marinova Pompliano. Like me, Polina has spent years studying and learning from the world's most successful people in business, entertainment, sports, and everyday life. She spent 5 years at Fortune magazine, where she wrote over 1,300 articles and served as author and editor of Term Sheet, Fortune's industry-leading newsletter on venture capital, private equity, and corporate deal-making. Today, Polina is the founder of The Profile, a media company that features long-form profiles of successful people and companies. Each week, Polina consumes hundreds of long-form profiles and shares her favorite finds with a loyal community of tens of thousands of people. The Profile is one of my favorite email newsletters to read when it hits my inbox, and it's always filled with valuable content I can learn from and put into action. In addition to her work on The Profile, Polina is the author of the new book, Hidden Genius: The Secret Ways of Thinking That Power the World's Most Successful People. Her book is an in-depth look at the mental frameworks that high performers use to achieve success in all kinds of endeavors. And in our conversation, Polina and I explored some of her favorite findings from those years that she's put into studying the world's top performers. And most importantly, we discussed how all of us can apply these lessons to our own lives. This episode is filled with so many important ideas and stories, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So let's pull the tarp and get straight to Polina Marinova Pompliano. Polina, like me, you have studied successful people for a very, very long time. And I'm curious, if you think back to your childhood or your teenage years, was there a moment that you read an article about someone, watched a documentary about someone or something, read a book, and just said to yourself, studying people has a really powerful opportunity to help me grow and accelerate my learning? Do you remember a moment like that?
Yeah. So for me, and I address this in the book, is that I never really appreciated history class in school because it was really, really hard for me to remember the names, the dates, the places, anything that had to do with a historical moment. I had a really bad memory, except for I realized that if I can contextualize this event and I could craft a story with real people, it would help me remember. Because as we all know, stories trigger emotion, and emotion is what triggers your memory. This is why everybody knows where they were on 9/11, is because it was such a supercharged emotional moment for the whole world. So when I was in high school, it started. I was in, I think, a world history class, and we were learning about the French Revolution. And I was like, for the life of me, I cannot remember this. And then I was like, okay, hold on. I read something really interesting about Marie Antoinette, who, I think this very interesting figure at the time, and how she lived this lavish life, but she was this young queen, and the people hated her because she was just a symbol of excess. And I started reading her story, and I was like, oh my gosh, she has a young son. Then they used her son against her to enforce him to make all these accusations against her. And I was like, this isn't just a story of the French Revolution. This is a personal story of things that everybody's experienced: grief, anxiety, terror, trauma. She walked to the guillotine to her own death. Imagine what that feels like. So to me, it was like, if I could pin down the key people here and understand how they were feeling and the emotions behind it, I can very quickly understand the incentives, and it helped me trigger my memory. So from there, I was like, okay, I learn when a person is at the center of a story. So I made my whole life of learning centered around a person, and it's so much easier for me to learn new things that way.
I'm curious, when you think about learning about a person and just indirectly or directly learning through that experience of studying that person, how do you make sure that the content that you're consuming around that person is well-rounded, brings different perspectives, and gives you a complete and as truthful of a picture as possible?
I learned this in journalism. Basically, when you're a journalist, you don't want to just talk to one person and take everything they say at face value and be like, this is fact. I heard it from one person. You want to interview like 35 people and see the patterns and the things that come from that and the things that are repeated. Those things that are repeated are probably closer to the truth than just doing one or two interviews. The same is in my research process. When I look at a person, I try to see profiles written about them, what other people are saying about them, the way they themselves present themselves on podcasts or video interviews or conferences, things like that. I pay attention to their body language. When they're asked a hard question, how do they respond? So I once heard Aaron Sorkin. No, it wasn't Aaron Sorkin. It was Hans Zimmer said this. He said, when I talk to a director and I'm trying to score the film, I listen to what they're saying, but I'm paying more attention to the subtext of the conversation. So how are they expressing themselves? It's all the contextual things around what they're saying, because words are one thing, but then when you pay attention to, do they talk with their hands like I do? Are they kind of emotional people? Or are they very just straight to the point? So I find that fascinating. And I try to, in my research when studying a person or trying to learn something new, I watch things that they've done. I listen to podcasts and interviews they've done. And I also read third-party profiles about them that they haven't quite influenced as much.
Is there somebody that you went into your study thinking one thing about and you came out with a completely contradictory conclusion about that person, good or bad?
Yeah. Okay. So one that really surprised me is when I was writing the book, I started working on profile dossiers, which are these individual deep dives I do every Wednesday. I was doing a bunch on authors because I wanted to see what their process was like and what they were doing. So I did one on Danielle Steele, who is one of the most prolific authors in the world. And I had read one article one time about how she works like 20 hours a day. And I was like, that's impossible. Who's working 20 hours a day? And as I dug into her story, I was really surprised with what I found because I like to include, yes, the successes of these people and the things that maybe we can learn from and replicate, but you can also learn from the things that you don't like. So from Danielle, I learned like she's an excellent writer, excellent storyteller, but her work ethic is not something that I want in my life because it doesn't sound like she's working from a place of, I really enjoy this. She's working from a place of, I want to escape reality and enter this fantasy world where I don't have to deal with reality. And when you realize the reality is that she lost the son to an addiction and then he passed away, she just dove into her work. And she says, you know, people look from the outside and they think I lead this glamorous life. But in truth, I'm kind of a recluse. Like I'm at home, I'm isolated all day long, and I sit in a chair and I write.
What's remarkable, Polina, is that story about Danielle Steele resonates with me deeply. I would say, when people ask me, like, what is the most consistent thing that you learn, Andrew, when you talk to all of these people that have achieved success in different industries and different domains and from different walks of life, what is most consistent? And I always say it's not as glamorous as it looks, or it's not even close to as glamorous as it looks. And there's a lot more failure than you assume. So when I interview an Olympic gold medalist, let's say a figure skater or a gymnast, for example, they always say to me, Andrew, if I win gold, the public sees me get it as close to perfect as possible. But what they don't see is tens of thousands of attempts that didn't go well. And almost to a T, every single one of them wishes that the public would see more of the struggle and more of the failures because they feel like there is this hero worship and idolatry that they are these perfect beings who somehow have this grand gift and there's not a lot of work and failure that goes into it. So it's interesting to hear the story about Danielle. And you address this in the book, this concept of hero worship and idolatry. And I think you get probably a lot of the same questions that I get. People say to me, oh, you just interviewed that person because they're a Grammy winner. You just interviewed them because their movie was nominated for an Oscar or they won a gold medal. And I'm as curious about the failures and the issues and the struggles as I am about the successes. And I think both working together gives you a little bit of a glimpse into how you can transform yourself, what to avoid, what to embrace.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you're young and you're just entering your career, when you're like in your early 20s, they tell you, find a role model, find somebody to quote unquote idolize, like whose life do you want? And I always struggled with that because I don't know, I always kind of knew that success doesn't exist in a vacuum as much as we want it to. And you know how they say never meet your heroes? It's for that exact reason. It's like when you put somebody up on a pedestal, I always ask people, okay, whose life do you want to replicate or whose path do you find admirable? Once they tell me, then I ask, okay, but are you also willing to make the same missteps, the same sacrifices, the same just awful things they have? Like maybe they didn't get to see their family for the first 20 years of their kids' lives. Like that sucks. Do you want that in order to achieve this other thing? It's all about priorities, and certain priorities like are not mine. And with working at Fortune magazine, working with the profile, I've interviewed some incredible people just like you, and I'm sure you've noticed this too, but I don't idolize these people. Every single time I talk to them, I know that there's an underbelly of darkness. And I always try to kind of get to that. When I interviewed Jeff Immelt, for example, we talked a lot about his failures and how shareholders just hated him and how he had to turn to family. It was a very open interview that I don't think a lot of people get to see from Fortune 500 CEOs. But also, I've interviewed Melinda Gates. Sounded amazing. I was one of those people that was like, look at Bill and Melinda Gates' relationship goals. And then a few months later, they get divorced and you realize like what was actually happening behind the scenes. And yes, I do believe that those people have a responsibility when you're that highly regarded in the public eye to share some of those things and say that things aren't perfect. Because when everything collapses, people are left being like, wait, what? And your entire worldview is shattered. So that's why I always think, there's value in learning, no value in idolizing. You can see somebody as, oh, wow, look at what they've achieved, but you should also look at the other side of the coin and be like, what do they have to give up?
Absolutely. I think that's such an important point, Polina, that we can put a pin in. I mean, learning over idolizing. And that's how I look at this too. Like I said a few minutes ago, I mean, everybody, regardless of what they do, it can teach you something through their successes and through their failures, and most importantly, a combination. You have had a remarkable journey, and I'm curious, you touched on Fortune and the profile there just a few minutes ago. I want to dig into that a little bit. So you're at Fortune, you're having great success there. You're writing one of their top email newsletters and columns in Term Sheet, and then you decide to leave and bet on yourself. I'm curious, what was the biggest surprise for you when you jumped from Fortune to the profile full time and essentially were all in on your brand? What was most surprising and maybe the biggest adjustment?
I think the most surprising was that how much when you work at a well-known brand, you are willing, or not you're willing, but you almost take for granted how much history and legacy there is behind you and why people answer your emails. So when I left, suddenly I wasn't Paulina at fortune.com. I was Paulina at readtheprofile.com. And that matters to people. So it really taught me that it's a double-edged sword. It's helpful in some cases to have the legacy of an institution behind you, But in other cases, it's actually more helpful for you to develop the relationships and you to build the brand yourself, because people earn trust with you as an individual, and other people's missteps don't reflect on you. For instance, I remember when someone from Vanity Fair reached out to Elon Musk for a quote, and he said, Vanity Fair sucks. And that had nothing to do with that reporter. That reporter's just working there, but it had to do with the legacy of the institution in Elon Musk's eyes. And then Elon turned around and gave a massive month-long interview to Tim Urban at Wait But Why, which is a blog that Tim started. So it's like, if you can use it in the right way, I actually think building a personal brand has much more value in the long term, because I found that people trust people. People don't necessarily trust faceless institutions.
I'm curious, just continuing that thought. Was there something that you worried a lot about in terms of that transition? Maybe it was just that. Maybe it was that you were going from a big name brand to a personal brand, and that was going to limit your ability to get access to people. Was there something else that you just worried a lot of time on, had sleepless nights, and you kind of like look back and say, that wasn't that big of a deal?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting because when I left Fortune to do the profile full time, there weren't any reporters from legacy media corporations that had left to work on their Substacks full time. I didn't know anybody. So to me, it was like, what am I doing? And it was this feeling of, it's really hard to believe in yourself when you're starting over, essentially. But in order to succeed, you do have to kind of bet on yourself. And that whole idea of, until now, I've been using Fortune as a crutch. When I walk into a room, I demand respect because I work at Fortune magazine. Suddenly you don't have that safety blanket or safety net. What is it? Safety net. So truly, you are betting on yourself that you will figure it out. And I think if there's one thing that I've learned from all these really remarkable people, it's that at some point in their life, there comes like a fork in the road, and they have to choose the safe path or the path that's kind of really dangerous and uncertain, but allows them to bet on themselves. And the thing that I've learned is that the most successful people aren't afraid to fail because they know that they can reinvent time after time, because they have the skills that they need in that new chapter. And that's the hardest part for people, is to jump. And I think the hardest part for me was truly making the decision to quit and actually jump, because I think from the outside, working at Fortune magazine was the pinnacle of success. But inside, I was like, there's more that I want to do. And I actually think that the profile will be an opportunity for me to learn more than it would be to stay at Fortune for another 5 years.
I think you quote Beyonce, who says something to the effect of, I don't gamble a lot, I don't place a lot of bets, but if I'm going to place one, it's going to be on me. And I think that rings true. And you said something there that I just jotted down as you were talking. Starting over. You used that phrase, starting over. I was worried that I was starting over. Now that you reflect on it, do you believe you were truly starting over, or did all of a sudden you realize that there was all this capital, social capital, political capital, a network effect that you had accumulated independent of Fortune that was truly Polina's, that you were able to tap into that reservoir and benefit and accelerate the growth of the profile?
Oh, absolutely. And I think for me, it's so easy to get into these thought patterns of, I'm starting over, this is going to be so hard, when you realize that you're starting over is some people's peak. So for example, I was telling this to my parents, and I remember my mom being like, no, you're not starting over. If you fail or whatever, you can just go get another job. That's a reversible decision. She was like, starting over was me and your dad and you. I was 8, coming to the US with no money, actually negative money, because they owed a loan to family and friends to help them come here. No money, no friends, no English, no jobs, nothing. And then you're starting to like build a new life in a totally different place. For me, I had made it up in my head of like, oh my goodness, like I'm starting a company. I don't know anything about this, but it's true. It's not starting over. You just have to trust that you already have those skills. And there are much harder things in life. And in the book, I talk about Francis Ngannou, who's this MMA fighter. He truly came from nothing and built his life into something. But he says, when I asked him what he would do after the MMA and if that would be starting over, he's like, I don't see it as starting over. I already made it. Like, I'm going to do something else, but it's not starting over. I think that's a very, very good point that you just made.
Everything is building upon one another. And like you said earlier, you're building skill sets and muscle that I firmly believe you can deploy in different ways. It's frankly why I think we see so many pro athletes get into venture investing and starting businesses, and then they have a massive amount of success in that. It's not just because they have a head start, because they've got capital and they have a brand and they have a social media following. They have discipline and they know how to grind through challenges. I think a lot of the skill sets in anything, whether it's sports to business, business to life, I mean, these things are all kind of applicable. You talked about a few highlights in the book there. I want to dig in a little bit more into hidden genius. Some of my kind of most favorite pieces and the most interesting aspects, the moments of elective hardship. So I am a big believer that like if we try and eliminate all friction from our lives, that's not good for us. You talk about a concept of creating moments of elective hardship. That's what you call it. Dive into that a little bit more deeply. What have you found about intentionally creating hardships, challenges, and kind of resistance in our lives?
Yeah, I got this idea from former Navy SEAL, current extreme athlete, David Goggins. And he talks about doing something every single day that sucks, that you absolutely don't want to do. And it's a way of creating voluntary friction or hardship in your life on a daily basis so that when life hits you with an involuntary hardship, it doesn't bring you to your knees and you don't know what to do. You're already like, okay, he calls it calloused the mind. There's a little bit of friction and my mind is flexible enough to know that I can overcome it. And then when those big moments come, like an illness or a death or something traumatic, you know that you won't buckle. And I think that's so important because all of us are like, oh, I just hope that I can live a life with a smooth sailing and no hardship. And it's actually, that's really, really bad for you because I mean, it's like the economy. When things are really good for a long time, when something bad happens, everybody loses their mind. It's like if you can create elective hardship in your daily life, whether it's, ooh, I was going to go on a run today, but it's pouring rain. Go do it anyway so that your brain's like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. But once you're doing it, it's like, okay, I can actually do this. It's not that bad. And I think the big hard moments in life, a lot of times, the pain is anticipatory. We think it'll be worse than it is. When it happens, your brain is like, and it's happening to you in the moment, you're like, oh, okay, I think I can handle this. I think I can handle this. So I think it's like by doing small things in your everyday life, and they don't always have to be physical feats. It could be, I really hate negotiating. One day you're going to have to negotiate your salary. Why don't you try to practice today, sell something on Facebook Marketplace and negotiate with the buyer and see how that feels? Like, or you hate public speaking, try doing something where it puts you outside of your comfort zone. You have to publicly speak. That gives you tiny ounces of confidence that will then build up for those big moments.
I tell people this funny little story all the time. And this is a little thing, but I have two little girls, and I just think that in this generation, there's a lot of curbside pickups and apps to get things. And sometimes you just got to wait in a good old fashioned line. And we were at the grocery store and there was one line with nobody and one line with like 8 people. And I said to the kids, we're going to wait in line. And people have laughed at me when I told that story. I said, I want you guys to know what it feels like to wait in line.
That's a good point.
Because when you watch a show on Netflix, you just speed through the commercials, or you want to watch your favorite show, like every season is available. Like now we used to have to wait. So I thought it was just a teaching moment, an opportunity to teach some patience as a virtue. But a lot of people have laughed at me when I've shared that. Polina, another thing I want to talk about is just the concept of becoming a better leader. Becoming a better leader doesn't just apply if you want to be a Fortune 500 CEO. People want to be better leaders of their family. They want to be better leaders of themselves. They want to be better leaders of a team, whether they're coaching in the major leagues or they're coaching a little league team. And I was struck by the commentary you had in the book around Spotify founder Danielle Ek and the idea and philosophy of inverting the pyramid. And I'm curious, what did you find when you talk? What is inverting the pyramid for the listeners who haven't read the book? And what did you specifically find and take away from that piece?
Yeah. So first of all, just the overarching theme of leadership, I wanted to drive home the idea that no matter who you are right now, you are a leader in someone's life and somebody's always watching, whether it's your kids or a younger sibling or something like that. When you're running a company, it's that magnified. But Danielle Ek, who's the founder and CEO of Spotify, had this interesting insight and I thought amazing example that he calls inverting the pyramid. So normally a leader is at the top of the pyramid and everybody else, all the employees trickle down. But he was like, what if we flip it? And it's more of a servant leadership model where the CEO is actually there to support and encourage and provide capital and resources for the people who have the ideas who are on the ground, aka the everyday employees. So he very much wanted that kind of culture at Spotify. And because he's the founder, he was able to cultivate that when Spotify was a tiny company to now when it's a global, massive company with thousands of people. But there was a team there that was working on some sort of feature for Spotify. And they presented their idea to Daniel, and he didn't love it. He was like, I mean, it's okay, but like I wouldn't spend all this time and money on it. But the team of engineers was like, we're going to keep working on this anyway, despite his lack of enthusiasm. So they continued to work on it. And then they launched it to the public without letting Daniel know. And he read about it in the press that it was launched. And he said that in that moment, he thought, oh my God, this is going to be a complete disaster. That feature ended up being the Spotify Weekly or Spotify Weekly. It's like the personalized Spotify playlist that we all get based on our music preferences or what we listen to. It's one of the most loved features on Spotify. And Daniel then was able to reflect and say, if this was top-down leadership and I said no, I would have killed the idea and it would never see the light of day. But think about the type of culture that he created to the point of not only that team continued working on it, even though the CEO wasn't excited about it, but the fact that they shipped it to the public without his approval. That just shows that the employees really are empowered to do what they think is best. And I think it reflects in the success that Spotify's had.
He's not only talking the talk, he's walking the walk because they're living those ideals. He's reading about this in the press.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's remarkable. I'm also fascinated by people who do things that, as people say, do things that don't scale. And I believe you reference it I know you talked about Lady Gaga in the book. I believe you mentioned Taylor Swift as well. I just listened to the Acquired podcast where they break down the business of Taylor Swift. And it is remarkably fascinating how many things Taylor Swift has done throughout her career that conventional wisdom would say don't scale. You can't do that at her level. There's no way she does that for her followers. Things like having album reveals privately at her home for her most engaged followers. And you think about these things and you assume that once people achieve some massive level of success, that they stop doing these things. But these are the things that really build community and build connection and show that you're truly authentic. What do you think it is about some people that they're able to do things that don't scale and they're able to be humble enough to continue doing doing things like that, even though they've achieved extraordinary amounts of success?
I think those are the people that have long-term success, because the people who are like, ooh, I'm famous now, I'm big time, I don't have to do what I did in the beginning. Those are the people that falter. And I think if you look at Taylor Swift right now, I mean, everybody's talking about her. I need to listen to that podcast. That's amazing. But everybody's talking about her, billions of dollars. Like, she's done so well for herself and she's very well liked. But you might remember, I mean, 6 years ago, she fell off the face of the planet for 2 years because people wanted to cancel her, and the Kanye situation. It was a whole array of things. But it's because of these tiny, non-scalable things that she's continued to do to build loyalty, lifelong loyalty with people. And that's essentially what builds community. She has listening sessions of her album with fans before it comes out at her house. She bakes them cookies. She'll randomly go through her Instagram and pick random people and send them gifts for Christmas. She'll show up at people's weddings and surprise them. Do you know how much that takes? Like, it takes time, it takes money, it takes effort. She could be doing a million other money-making things, except she's not. She's going to somebody's wedding to surprise them. And then that goes viral and it builds more goodwill in the community. I think she's very, very, very smart. And Lady Gaga's manager, Troy Carter, once said, it's the difference between, this is the strategy of the slow bake versus the microwave. Like, if you want to do it right and you want to do it well for a long period of time, you got to slow bake and not just like do the microwave and do it overnight, and then you're an overnight sensation, but then people never hear about you again. It's like, what are things that you can do in your line of work that build community or like a sense of lifelong loyalty, and not just fandom for you, or like things that make you look good in the public eye and you have fans, you have an audience, but you are not actually in touch with the people on the ground, kind of like we talked with servant leadership.
I love the comparison, the visual there between the slow cook and the microwave. I'm gonna have to dig into that more. The concept of overnight success is something that, and the fact that there's really no such thing as overnight success, is a theme that comes up constantly in the conversations that I have. I'm reminded constantly of a country music songwriter that I talked to, and he said, it took me 18 years to become an overnight success. And there's so many stories like that you just watch it and it just looks to the surface like it just happened. But there was so much that went into it. Polina, you've been so generous with your time. I've got 2 more questions for you as we wrap up our discussion. This has been something every week that when I read the profile, I think to myself, okay, I wonder what Polina would say if I asked her this question. If you could write a 500-page biography or memoir on any person, dead or alive, who would it be?
Wow. Okay. This is totally random. I'm not that fascinated by the public figures that, we all look to. I actually would do one on my dad's dad, so my grandfather. He has like a fascinating story. He was an architect who also wrote poetry. I recently found his old poems and like bound them into a book for family. But he lived through communism, except he had access to Western radio and like things that he knew what was actually going on, where in Bulgaria was like a seriously communist country and he was grappling with all these things. So to me, like, those are the stories that are so, so fascinating. I would 100%, if he was still alive, I would love to interview him. And I think this is the thing that I always tell people is like, when we're young and we have grandparents, we don't think that they were young like us back in the day. They had the same feelings and emotions and crises. By the time we realize that, they're either too old or they have passed away. So one of the most amazing things that you can do is profile or interview some of the people in your life whose legacy you want to save. And even better, if you can record their voice or record them on video. It's something that will live long after you. And this is why a lot of people ask me, why didn't you just use a voice actor for your book to record the audiobook? And I was like, I was going to. I don't love the sound of my voice. But then I thought about, hey, I have a daughter. In the future, how cool will it be that my great grandkids could be like, I wonder what grandma sounded like at 30 years old. Like, that's cool. So it was a lot of different things. But I think for me, the person that I would love to profile is somebody in my own family.
That's remarkable. And I think about that a lot through the lens of this podcast. And I say every episode that I put into the podcast apps is just another deposit that one day my kids and their generations can listen to and say, what was dad or what was grandpa or what was great grandpa fascinated about? And that's
how cool is that?
It is really cool to think about. And it's one of these things that also, like, when I set out to do this, I said, I'm going to pursue as diverse of a range of people and backgrounds as possible because, one, I'm really curious and I like connecting all these dots. But two, I don't know what future generations are going to want to listen to and what they're going to be interested in and what my daughters are going to want to, what rabbit holes they're going to want to go down. So to me, it was make it as diverse as possible. You mentioned your daughter there, Polina, and I'm curious as we wrap up our conversation, you must have notebook after notebook and spreadsheet after spreadsheet of ideas and lessons. If you had to pick one thing that you've learned from studying all of these successful people, is there one that you believe you want to model every day for your daughter?
Yes. And I think it's the TARP mentality ultimately. It's that consistency plus time equals trust. And it's consistency in every area of your life. You can't say, oh, I'm an amazing parent if you're like, but I only see my kids for 5 minutes a week because I'm achieving this other thing. Okay, that's amazing. But if your priorities are family and career and things like that, you have to make sure that you're consistent with what you say you're going to do or keep the promises that you make to them. And I'm very cognizant of that in my personal relationships and my professional relationships, because I know that when you're building a business, when you make a promise, you have to keep it. Otherwise, for a long period of time, consistency plus time equals trust, because the trust is only earned. You can't just expect that people will trust you with their money, with their time, with access to other people. So as a parent, I think about, okay, what are the promises I make to you? I'm going to play with you every day. I will take you to the park. Small things. She's 1.5. But over time, that will build trust with her, and she'll know, hey, when I go to my mom and she says she's going to do something, she will do it. It's not a flaky kind of I promise thing. So I think to me that, like, the unsexy Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday grind of like, yes, it's easy to keep promises on Saturday, but are you going to do it in like the thick of things? That's what I want to model.
Are you going to do it in the thick of things? That's such an important message for us to wrap up. I think everybody listening can take something away from that. Are you going to do it when it's hard? Are you going to do it when it's easy to be inconsistent? It's such a powerful message. Polina, I have enjoyed our conversation so much. We'll have to catch up again sometime in the future and figure out everything else that you've learned studying all of these successful, fascinating people on your own personal and professional journey. There is no question you are a TARP puller. You pull the TARP every single week for your subscribers. And like I said, the book, what a massive hit. Everybody who hasn't had a chance to read it or check it out, you got to go get your hands on a copy of Hidden Genius. It is filled with wisdom. Polina, thank you for being a TARP puller. You're forever a part of the community, and we'll have to catch up again soon, all right?
Thank you so much. I really love this.
Thank you for joining me this week. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you can catch all of our upcoming episodes. And if you are like me and want a world full of TARP pullers, then leave a review to help others find us. You can also follow me on Twitter at Andrew H. Moses. That's Andrew H. Moses. And be sure to sign up for my email newsletter at everybodypullsthetarp.com/newsletter. I'll share tips and insights to help you achieve maximum success and happiness. Today is a great day to pull the TARP. I am rooting for you. See you next time.